Welcome to the CFA Connections Plain Talk series. This is a special 5-part video series on how to become a corporate flight attendant. Starting with a complete overview on how to navigate the CFA Connections platform pages, start here, and how to become a CFA. This is a complimentary and robust step-by-step guide on how to start your career as a corporate flight attendant. We include numerous resources, training and career development programs, scholarship opportunities, mentorship programs, and more. In the other videos in this series, I have one-on-one conversations with corporate flight attendants, and we discuss how they became corporate flight attendants, as well as what they wish they had known when starting their careers. These are all not to miss discussions. Let's get started. You basically specialize in transitioning commercial airline flight attendants to corporate. And when you do these type of sessions or coaching or just fielding questions, is there a certain mentality or mindset of the corporate flight or the commercial flight attendant?
There is.
And do you consider these hurdles and barriers, or how do you... Okay.
That's a good question. Some it's a little bit of both. Some are open-minded, but I see a good majority of a closed-mindedness of like, I've already got my safety training, or I'm a certified flight attendant, so why wouldn't it work on the private side? And so it's kind of like I have to unravel the straight and narrow thinking that's taking place and like have a different open mindset. Yeah.
I find that's probably the most common. I see like on social media groups, mainly like Facebook groups, where people post a question that they are a commercial flight attendant, and it could be a very high scale airline.
Mm-hmm.
No mention of training is ever in their post. They don't think they need it.
That's a good point. Yeah. Because I come from Delta, so I understand that thinking of, I've come from Delta, so why wouldn't they want me? So but it took a little bit for me to have that, to be humbled a little bit of like, most people really don't care that's where I came from. They want to see that I have who I am as a person and what kind of personality do I bring to the team with the pilots. And I didn't realize that was really a thing, because in commercial you don't really hang out with the pilots. It changed. If you're domestic, it changes every leg, or internationally the door's closed. So you like, it's the same crew going over and coming back, but the door's closed and there's no communication. And then private, you're helping them stay awake. So
exactly. And you're alone. You're not with a whole crew of other fellow flight attendants too. And I think when I made the transition too, but many years ago, and when I did the transition, then cabin safety training wasn't so much in the forefront. It wasn't that absolute, now things have done a huge shift change over the last 20 years, but it wasn't why I was hired. They hired me because of me.
Yes.
Because I had my commercial background, it gave me the confidence to get on a private jet without training. And once I started, then I realized the importance of having the differences training.
Very good. That's a very good point.
And I've been, very passionate about that and been part of the team of the flight attendant committees and whatnot that have changed that trajectory with cabin safety training in business aviation and the importance of it. And I think that's the biggest hurdle, I think, for commercial airline flight attendants, is I experienced it too with peers and myself, is that the humble pie that yes, your training is really good, but the only similarity is they both take place in aviation. Mm-hmm. Apples and oranges, the requirements and regulations are completely different. I feel it gives you a good platform as a base.
Yeah.
But most of it does not transition into a private jet, because you are a sole entity. You're by yourself on the aircraft, and even your cabin safety training commands don't work because you've got people facing all different directions on a private jet versus all forward on a commercial airline. So those differences, they really do build.
Yes, that's very true. Another thing too is that like safety training was 6 weeks at Delta, but literally one day was service. one day. And then that's like the pinnacle of being on a private jet, is like you expect to have 5-star service.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, my training was about 4.5 weeks. And I was US Airways. And
Uh-huh.
that was the hardest thing that I couldn't wrap my head around, is when I went to the cabin safety training. Then for corporate, it was 3 days emergency procedures as an initial student.
Yeah.
And possibly can they teach me in 3 days? It was amazing how much I learned in 3 days
Yes.
and the differences. And some correlate, some don't. There's a lot of contradictions because of the type of aircraft too.
True.
And the hands-on training, because not all aircraft, are represented. It's almost impossible to represent all doors and windows of every business jet that's out there. So it's more generic, all-inclusive training versus the airline. It's specific to those aircraft that they operate.
Yes, it's very true. It's very true. I think the other thing that was a big, like when I went to the safety training, was realizing that you're not yelling at them. Like you're talking to them in a conversation. Like you're not running, you're not yelling, run, come this way or whatever, but it's more of like, and you're resituating people. Like you're not like in the airline, there's no resituating, that's your seat. But on the safety training from a private side, you're resituating people according to able-bodied passengers to be able to help open a window and whatever. So that was
Well, there's no emergency exit row.
yes, yes, yes.
Yes, unless you're in the charter and the shuttle service, which is another spectrum of business aviation. And that's why there's so many entities in this industry that we can't possibly prepare you for all of them, because there's no.
True.
But that's the differences for sure. It's the whole demeanor when dealing with your clients, because you may only have one passenger. Guess what? You are my able-bodied passenger.
Guess what?
You are it. I don't have 100 people to choose from.
Yes.
A couple of people. Okay, you're it. And that's the difference, a big difference.
Yes, it is. The other thing that I wish I had known was that experience was so important to have. And it was frustrating in that I had the commercial experience, but not private aviation experience. So I wish somebody had shared with me to help. Maybe I wouldn't have listened. I don't know. There's that aspect too. It would have taken me a minute to listen. But whenever I was having trouble finding work, if somebody had shared with me that you can get aviation experience by private jet detailing, being hired there, or working with caterers, like working with the private chef, because like if you don't have the funds to get the culinary training, you can work with them and have real experience with them. Or like people, I heard people would say you go to the FBO and like just hang out or whatever, but I'm like, what's the point of that? What am I supposed to do? So I wish that someone had shared with me more of, then like I said, having to be open-minded, but whenever you're not getting work, I didn't have a choice. What do you think?
I totally agree. I think it could be a misconception, and it's also depending on if they've already received their training, what the pitch is that they receive to go to that training. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there and misconceptions on this career and the success. You spend a lot of money to get your training wherever you go. There's still no guarantee that you're going to find success, and there's no guarantee of when you're going to find that success. You go to your training, and there's all different levels of that training, but once you have graduated and you're trained, when do you fly your first trip? When do you find that success? And it could be tomorrow, it could be next week, it could be 2 months, it could be a year. I know flight attendants, it was a year before they got their first break. It's just, but there's so many variables because it depends on your location and the region. Is there a need for flight attendants in that area? Is it oversaturated? And how many flight departments are willing to give a new to industry that first chance opportunity? There's yeses and nos in all those spectrums. But I find also it is reliant on the individual. How hungry are you to get this career? You need to work for this career. You got your certification and your training. They're not going to just start calling you. Now you have to take
a good point.
and start knocking on doors. And that's where, it's networking too and self-marketing. So you get your training, but then it's not an absolute. You have to then take that as your tool and then start networking yourself. And this industry, I find, is a very emotionally driven industry where you have to make those connections, in-person connections with individuals, with flight departments, with fellow crew members, because it only takes that one referral. That's the key. It only takes that one person to connect you to that other person, and they may give you that opportunity. And then once you've flown that one trip, then it seems to just domino after that. You've broken the ice, and now the phone starts ringing. You build a clientele base. So it's not an immediate, I think, is the biggest wake-up call and the reality check for a lot of people. And, you know, if someone calls me and asks me, you know, inquires about starting out, I'm like, hold off on spending and investing in your training. Do your research first. Know your area, the region. If you're willing to relocate, that's tough if you're not in an optimum area, because now you're making a huge investment on a what if. But there are a lot of operations that will airline you to position, so you can live anywhere by a major airport because the planes are in constant motion. So you're chasing the plane, not flying to work. So there's so many variables there, but I think there's a lot of confusion and I see I mean, it's so great that social media has a lot of resources and discussion groups so people can pose these questions. But again, there's a lot of subjective answers and responses, you know, and so that's where, you know, I'll respond the best I can, but you can't handhold them through the whole journey too. They have to do it themselves. You can guide them and coach them and direct them and give them your best recommendations, but it's still ultimately up to them, because then you get asked the question of, like, what is the success rate, or how many, you know, what are my chances of, once I've gotten trained, of being successful? How do you answer that question?
I think it all boils down to what you said a second ago, in that, how hungry are you? Because my opinion is that if you know beyond a shadow of a doubt private aviation is where you're supposed to be, like, this is where my life is, it's going to happen. If you know that this is where you're supposed to be, I think the hunger naturally comes to go after it. But if you're still in that, I don't know if I'm supposed to do this or not, then my opinion, I don't think it will happen, or it will take several years even, because you're not fully 1,000,000% committed, because that's what it takes.
I do the workshops, and it's all about the fit. They're
Yes.
looking for that connection, that emotional connection, but also the, you know, the philosophy and the work ethic of this flight department. And so they're just not going to hire a resume that fits their need. They're going to hire the person and the personality, because most everything is trainable. And that's why I always say, you know, don't put the cart in front of the horse. That yes, you're making an investment in training, and yes, that's, you know, almost mandatory for a lot of flight operations, not all, but most. But they may interview you without the training, because you know you can get that. They want that fit. And then some may make the investment and pay for the training. I mean, there are flight departments that do that. It's not always a guarantee. And I know there's a lot of new to industry, they're holding out for that. I'm like, well, then this is not the career for you, because those are very limited. And if you're waiting for a company to pay for your training, then may not be the career for you. You have to make that investment in the training, because you're investing in yourself, and you're investing in your career, not just financially, but also personally. You have to make a double investment. And it's very expensive to start, but I have it on the CFA connection page. If this job was easy, everybody would be doing it, because it's an amazing career, but it's not an easy career, but it's still a professional career. And so then you have to work for it.
Yes.
You
It's
know,
kind
it's
of
not
like college. Like
exactly.
that used to be the thing, and sometimes it's still whatever. But like, to go to, like, in order to have a career, you had to go to college. It's kind of the same thing, but more of a trade school concept of investing in yourself, so that way you can be employable.
It's true. And yeah, I think that's a really good point.
So do you think about, like you said, wait a second before getting your training? Where is that line between deciding when to get your training. Like I didn't get it right away either, but like I just, because I didn't have the $5,000 up to just put up front or whatever it is for whichever one.
Right.
But I flew for a little bit, people that would accept me with what I had. So
Mhm.
where is that line of deciding when do you do the training and all that?
When the phone stops ringing or you're being challenged by flight departments, like, oh, we require this training.
Okay.
And that's the sticky wicket in this
Mhm.
industry, because yes, there are flight departments that we're not corporate flight attendants on board, we're cabin servers. They don't require the cabin safety training. Now, you'll never hear me say that cabin safety is not paramountly important, because whether the flight department requires you to be cabin safety trained, I say to still make that investment in yourself to save your own butt in an emergency. And have that, because in an emergency situation, who are the passengers going to be looking at for direction? And then you're like, oh, I'm only here for service, and that's where, we've gone through a lot of transition in business aviation because of aviation incidents and accidents, and that there were cabin servers in the cabin that were only there for service, but the clients and the passengers didn't know that. And so that's where, from an accident, now they're required briefings for charter for 135. The pilots do the briefing, and they're required to tell the clients that this person's on board for service only or cabin safety trained because of those. And so that's where, the justification of the third crew member got really involved in that. And that's why we did a huge push for cabin safety training because of these variables. But in business aviation, we're still not even required on board for 19 seats or less, because this is the difference between corporate and commercial, where you're always required at least one flight attendant on board, and then basically you add one for every 50 seats as a comparison. Where in business aviation, we're still not even required to be on board, but that doesn't mean we're not. It's all written in the SOPs for the flight departments. But I think, to back up to where you said, I think that if you find that people are using you as a cabin server and it's not trained, it's a catch-22, because you're going to get a lot of pouncing from peers too, that you're not cabin safety trained and you're flying. So it's a risk. But if you're flying, and hopefully you're saving your money, and you can invest then in your training so you can be cabin safety trained. But that's why I always tell everyone to kind of pause when they're starting out before they go to their cabin safety training, because once you're trained, the clock starts ticking on your currency. For 135, it's every year, every 12 months with a 1-month grace period. So you have 13 months before you're expired. For private, you can go 2 years. And so that's the thing. So if you immediately just jump right in, and I see it all the time, where I'm going to get my cabin safety training done now, get it out of the way. And then they don't even start looking for work for 6 months because they're getting everything else together. And now the clock is ticking, and now they're expired, and now they have to reinvest and go to recurrent. And they haven't even flown their first trip.
That's painful.
Painful. And
it's painful.
A former instructor that used to train flight attendants, I saw it a lot.
Did you? Okay.
And it was really, and you try to coach them the best. It's like, maybe you should hold off spending the money until you actually have something lined up. And again, it could be no fault of their own of why they're not finding success. I mean, there's so many variables like we talked about, but making those initial researches and connections to actually see if there's work available for you, and if you fit the criteria or you're getting interest. Because if you're interviewing and they're like, we would love you, but you're not trained, go get your training.
Yes.
But if you're not getting anywhere, getting any hits, that's the tough pill to swallow, is that maybe this career is not your right fit for now. So I think there's a fit for everybody, all walks of life, sizes and shapes, ages, doesn't matter. Get that question all the time. Am I too old? Am I too young? There usually isn't, just age, which we've discussed before. Usually most of them require minimum 21, sometimes 25, because of
the rental car.
Rental cars. You have to be 25 to rent a car, and a lot of times it's your responsibility to rent a car when you're with a flight department, or maybe purchasing alcohol. So you have to be 21. So, but there's flight attendants that I know that were young that did it. There's ways around everything, but the age cap, there isn't one. So yeah.
I think it's actually talking about the age cap. I think it's easier the more mature that you are because of the clientele that we're flying, and that they prefer to have that mature and life experience, not talking about aviation experience, but just life experience on board.
Yeah, over the years, I've seen, all different requests from flight departments, and it is quite, there's some that only want female, there's some that only want males. There's some that tend to want younger and pretty for what, because it's a demo. And there's others that just want good quality service and possibly safety. They're looking for that full package. And so it doesn't matter what they look like, how old they are, they want professionalism in the cabin. And so that's where, there's a fit for everybody. How do you find the fit? That's
networking.
Yeah. It's organic. It just has to happen. But
yes.
That's networking and meeting people and connecting with people, because that's how it works in this. It's everyone who you know and who you've connected with is how you find success in this industry.
I think that's something else that I wish I had known in the beginning was truly the power of networking. Like Dad taught me growing up, it's who you know. Like those are the people that get you jobs or whatever. And it didn't quite hit me, but realizing now more than ever, like there is no small networking event, because all it takes is one person to like completely change your life. They may know of the unicorn Part 91 account, and voila, just because you went to coffee with them one day. So it's like never turn down a networking opportunity if you're hungry and you need work. Is my for that aspect.
Because you were flying about what 3 years before you went to NBAA base for the first time.
Yep.
And once you did that huge networking event, the convention, which is just, it's a lot to process because it's so huge. Did you experience a trajectory change?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Like even now, I know I'm supposed to be at NBAA, but I'm like, do I really need to? Yeah, you do. You don't know who's going to be there. Like my friends that I have now have come from NBAA, not the little coffee meetups. And yeah, there are those, but like lifelong friends come from that expense. And also the thing to think about too is like, that's what I'm getting from some of my students right now is like, it's so expensive. I said, yeah. And if you invest in it, that's how many people are not going because it's expensive. So because you do, people know that you invested in it and they're like, she's serious or he's serious.
I think that's a really good point. I think if you're budgeting yourself for this big investment, like we said, cabin safety, it can be $3,500 to $5,000 just for the training. And then you have transportation and hotel and meals and all of the add-ons. But I think you really need to budget also attending at least 2 networking events, whatever the admission rate is, and if transportation is required for those. But packaging that in also in the full spectrum of your training. I think then secondary trainings, because that's the other thing I see is that some new to industry, they go and get their cabin safety training and then they jump right in and get advanced culinary training and all this training and that training. I'm like, do you really need it yet? Because you may, but it's a may. It's valuable training. If you can afford it, do it. But if you're on a budget, hold off, because if you go to a reputable training vendor and get your cabin safety training and whatever services packaged in there, that's enough on a resume. That's enough to get you hired on a resume. Everything else is add-on if you need it. If you're finding those hurdles, and they're saying, oh, what's your culinary experience, or we're looking for that, maybe then you do a reality check and then look for that investment, because you can spend easily $15,000.
Easy.
So
yes.
That's why I'm always like, just take a pause. And do you need this? Because there's a lot of flight departments where you don't need the advanced culinary training. It's amazing training. You're going to learn a lot, but do you really need it? How is that if it's just building your resume, okay, that's your money if you want to invest in that. There is no expiration date on that training, just the cabin safety training. So I say all training that's applicable to this job, do it or showcase that on your resumes too. Anything that has to do with hospitality and customer service, and showcase those. And I think that's where a lot of new to industry too, I'm finding it, especially if they're multiple language, they don't even list it or it's way on the bottom. That's a huge one to showcase. And without experience, you can be hired just because you speak a language of that the destination that they need.
Yes, that's very true too. And then also the classes are another way of networking as well. So there is that aspect too of more than just having the training. There's networking opportunities, and who's taking the class, because the culinary people are not necessarily new to industry. They may have been flying for 12 years and they've finally like doing their culinary, and then who knows who they know.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really true, because you are going to meet other people in these trainings and all different and all levels of experience too.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And like you said, it only takes that one connection to make it happen. So
it's true, and you never know where that one person is going to come from.